Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 120 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, and I'm joined by our co-host, Brad.
Hello, everybody.
Before we got too far into this episode, I just wanted to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by PureMTGO.com. If you guys want to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Common Knowledge YouTube channel, and check out our Patreon. With that out of the way, let's get on with the podcast for the week.
All right, sounds good. We got kind of a special one this week, don't we, buddy?
Yeah, we do. With Pauper formats on Arena gaining so much attention lately, we thought we'd take an episode to bring on Alaric, one of the go-to people for all things historic Pauper, to talk about the format. These, are they called Artisan Events?
Artisan Events are a little bit different. Thank you, by the way, for having me on the show. Artisan Events are welcome. Commons and uncommon cards. It's actually become its own format, which does have its own following, so to speak. Mostly what I run these days is historic Pauper, though, and they typically come around every 3 months or so, and then standard Pauper comes around for another 3 times a year as well.
Oh, okay, excellent. That's good to know.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate you coming on the show as well, just to get some general thoughts about the meta, how to build decks, and stuff like that in the format.
Yep, I definitely think I've never actually played the format, but it seems very interesting to me. It's something that I would definitely like to get into. And I know a lot of, like I said before we even started recording, a lot of my Twitter buddies and people online, Discord, this and that, seem very intrigued by the format. There's just a lot of questions, and honestly, I'm hoping we can clear some of that stuff up this evening.
Definitely. Hit me with whatever you got.
Awesome.
Yeah, so here at Common Knowledge, before we get into the main part of the show, we always jump into what decks we've been playing. Alaric, have there been any cool decks you've been playing recently?
What's the most interesting thing I've played recently? I've been trying to switch around a fair bit within Historic Pauper, and I think the deck that I've enjoyed the most is something that I call Dimir Snowball. It's kind of a tribal synergy deck that the tribe is actually value instead of a typical creature type. And it's based around the fact that we realized that a mid-range deck that gained value in Historic Pauper was actually better at beating the control decks than anything else. And it was better than trying to out-control the control decks. And this deck fit in a really interesting spot where it had enough removal and enough creatures to beat the aggro decks, and it had enough value to actually overcome the control decks by kind of nickel and diming them 1 to 2 points at a time, and never giving them a chance to actually leverage the removal. So I've been playing a deck that's like that in the last season or so, but I've been trying to switch it up a little bit. But that's definitely my favorite deck at this time.
Excellent. You had me at Dimir, and then you definitely had me at Snowball. I love it. Is that something you brewed up yourself, or is that more of a community, brew? Or I guess how does that work specifically with these formats?
I think before 6 months ago or 7 months ago, that's where I really dialed into the community aspect. Before that, I was mostly figuring out my own brews with the events that came around a couple times a year. But once I was able to actually connect with the community, deck building definitely increased in velocity. This deck I cannot take full credit for. I originally was developing a Dimir deck that I created entirely on my own to beat the Hexproof Menace, which exists in Magic Arena official queues. I'll explain the differences in the ban list on why it's not quite as good in player-run events later. But I developed a blue-black deck, and then another person developed a different blue-black deck. Well, that might sound very similar. They only overlapped by 15 non-land cards across the entire 75. And the concept was, could you generate enough early momentum and enough value that you could overcome 1-for-1 removal? And then I said, hold on, I don't actually like the way that this deck is going, even though it's very good. And then I changed 40 cards or something like that from that deck. And then it reached the current iteration of where it's at now. So I can take some credit. I cannot take credit for the initial idea.
No, that's great. I love it when people work together. You take little bits of ideas from this deck here and this guy here, this player, this person. That tends to work out pretty good. I like that. What have you been playing, Mr. Christian?
This week, I've honestly been playing mostly other formats outside of the Pauper realm. And I guess more classic Pauper. I've been playing around with Blue-Black Fairies. Nothing super intense. I haven't jumped in any leagues with it or anything. Just been hanging out in the practice rooms, stuff like that.
Okay. Like the pretty standard meta list, or have you been tinkering around with it?
I've been doing that thing that we talked about where I take the 75 cards and then stress test one card as a 4 of.
Okay.
So
what was your stress card?
Well, we talked about some last week about how the blue removal cards have been really disappointing us in the format. So I stress test those just to make sure that we weren't wrong. And then after that, just different sources like a card advantage. Because for whatever reason, whenever I play that deck, I always lose to the other more controlling decks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just the way that I've been playing. But that could not be the reason as well.
So you think it's more of a pattern of play rather than the deck itself?
Yeah, because playing against other control decks, still stress testing other types of like card advantage, whether that be Bonder's Ornament or whatever, I still end up losing those matchups. So I'm starting to think it's more of just like a blind spot in my personal actual gameplay ability.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So you were testing out like, was that Raven's Form and Bind the Monster and those sort of things? Okay.
Yeah, those were just for fun. And then sort of playing the 4 of Behold the Multiverse, 4 Bonder's Ornament, all like format staples that might not necessarily always see play in that deck, just to see which ones are the best in the control mirrors.
Sure. Yep. I think a lot of people do that. It's a good way to find out what works. Whenever you see a 5-0, deck dump on Wednesdays or whatever, and you pull up a meta list and it has a 1 of a card you never thought of, you can guarantee that pilot probably played 50 games with 4 of that card, 3 of that card, 2 of that card, and they finally landed on 1, and it ended up working out for them. So I think you're on the right path with that sort of testing mindset.
I hope so. What about you? Have you been playing anything cool?
I've been tinkering around a little bit on MTGO. I'm still trying to get this Esper party list to at least function. I still don't know if it's even to the point where it can win a game yet or a match. It started out as a hot mess, but following Snapbolt Games, I believe is his Twitter handle on Twitter, he's been brewing this. He's been playing a lot with this Black-White Soul Sisters list that he's had some luck with. So I sort of adopted half of his deck into what I already have, and I like it a lot better. It seems a lot more functional, at least. It's not totally smoothed out yet, but with the Soul Sisters, they're clerics. Every creature in the deck plays into the party mechanic. So it was one of my favorite mechanics, definitely one of my favorite new mechanics that has come out in a long time. I've been trying to make it work ever since September, I guess, when Zendikar came out, and probably as close as I've gotten, and I'm probably as close as it's going to get until we get something a little better in the format.
Yeah, actually, you and I were both disappointed, I think, by a ruling about the card Of One Mind.
Yeah, I guess I don't play it a lot on MTGO. I was testing it on MTGO, I was just goldfishing it, and every time I went to cast it, it was asking me to pay the extra 2, and I had a human cleric on board, and I had a changeling on the board, and I thought, well, why is this not working? The changeling is not human, and then I have a human. It should just be 1 blue, but it eventually clicked, and I understood that even though the changeling is non-human, it technically is still human. So you have to have an actual non-human as long as you have a human on board. I was very disappointed, so I took him out, and I went with 3 Night's Whispers instead, and that works just fine.
Out of curiosity, in Classic Pauper, is anyone trying to use changelings as army tokens at all?
It is always talked about. Anytime you bring up any sort of brew that even resembles a tribe, someone brings up a mass or the zombie tokens, but I've yet to see any success or anyone post anything about them. But it's always talked about.
Fair enough.
Yep. It seems like it seems fun. I don't know how competitive it would be or whatever, but it's definitely a deck that I would just enjoy playing. Is that a strong mechanic on Arena in this format?
It's been talked about. I don't think anyone has really pushed into changelings quite yet. It's been used, but the problem is that none of the changelings are good enough on their own to stand up in this format. They're mostly role players, and no one's really using as many amass cards. There was a time when Toll of the Invasion was one of the better discard spells, but it's kind of been overrun by more targeted stuff in Duress and more flexible answers in Memory Leak.
Okay, I like that. Memory Leak showed up in Classic Pauper for a little while, I guess right after that set was released. I still like the card. It doesn't show up too much anymore, but I didn't think about the fact that there's probably not as many good changelings that comment on Arena as there is throughout the rest of Magic history, So
I mean, we got our entire population in the last month and a half, so.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's sort of the decks that we've been playing over the course of the last week. So I guess now we can get into our main topic, which is just more questions for Mr. Alaric. This coming Friday on March 26th, there's an FNM at Home Pauper event on Arena. So this interview's sort of been in our minds and our notes for a while, so we figured it'd be a great time to go ahead and bring you onto the show just to ask you some questions, pick your brain a little bit.
Yep.
I'm delighted to be here.
Now it's one of my first questions. Sorry. Like I said before, much of our listener base, they're fairly unaware of these types of events. Maybe they heard of them before, but they've never actually clicked in and played or talked to anybody that's played. Can you just sort of, without going too deep in on it, can you just sort of give us a little more information about them? Are they, like you said before, they're mostly player-run events? They're not necessarily sanctioned by WotC or anything like that? Or are they put on by LGSs? Because I know LGSs play some role in Arena events as well.
To briefly clarify, are we talking about the event this coming Friday, or are we talking about the events that I'm typically involved with?
And right there, I did not know there was a huge difference.
There's a huge difference both in terms of band list and in terms of how they generally are run. I can try and give a quick rundown of each, if that'll help everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Arena typically runs its own F&M format every week that's free. You can get 2 rare individual card rewards, and the format will change. I'll admit that I end up going to the internet to find deck lists because I'm not as familiar with most of the formats myself.
Okay.
But when Historic Pauper comes around, I'm generally a little bit more aware. However, there's one big difference in the gap between Arena official events, like this one this coming Friday, and events that I personally run via MTG Melee or other websites.
Okay.
The main difference is the banned list. Wizards of the Coast, in all official queues, has banned Persistent Petitioners. It's too unreasonable of card to have where you can just play 48 or probably 45 Persistent Petitioners and just deck the opponent. There's no deck that's fast enough to actually get past 45 of the Petitioners.
Right.
So I agree with them. However, there's an additional card because of historic anthologies that they added to the format called Ancestral Mask. It's a very innocuous card. It sees no play in Classic Pauper because Hexproof already plays in a different kind of dynamic and has enough power. But in Historic Pauper, Ancestral Mask changes the Hexproof decks into an absolute terror, and it redefines the format from, let's say, if you remove it from the format, it goes to about 20 individual decks, and it chops it down to about 3.
Holy cow.
And it gets even worse because all of the official queues are best of 1. So you don't have a sideboard that you can actually pull on to actually try and beat these decks and bring enough sacrifice effects, etc.
Right.
So unfortunately, the actual queues are a little bit of a nightmare these days, as you're somewhat forced into playing Hexproof, or you're forced into playing one of 2 decks that I think can beat Hexproof, which are right now Mono-Black Control, because it brings enough discard elements to the field, and Blue-Black Control-ish. I'll explain a little bit more. Usually I play a handful of more creatures than would typically be played by a pure Blue-Black Control deck.
Okay, that makes sense. So Ancestral Mask is format warping. That's interesting.
Incredibly so. And I was used to playing best of 1 without it, and then I joined a number of Discord leagues and started organizing my own events, and I agree that it absolutely should be banned. And that's something that I kind of petition WotC every once in a while to try and do. They haven't listened to me yet, but if we can gain enough traction with the format, I think that it's a good change for the format, as it does really open it up and allow a lot of players to brew some interesting decks and have some interesting
absolutely.
ideas.
That's kind of what I'm hoping this interview brings, at least on a somewhat of, whatever level, is just traction, just eyes on the format, interest. I haven't actually played with MTG Melee, but I guess I'm in their Discord and I've chatted with some people that play there regularly. Is it a pretty seamless website to either play and or run events on?
I personally found it very seamless. I used to be an MTG judge, so I had some experience with the, I'm not sure, I guess I'm no longer a judge, so I can say this,
right.
The terrible software that they were using at the time. And you can ask any judge from 5 to 10 years ago, and they're going to say the software is just horrible.
Yeah,
but
I've
this
heard
one was
stories.
actually, this one was created by a few software engineers who were judges, and it's a really nice piece of work. And it's incredibly easy to use. I know that a number of non-judges, like just anyone who wants to, can sign up to be an organizer pretty much. You can run your own events. It's incredibly simple. It's incredibly easy to pair around, to drop a player if you need to change a deck list, whatever you need to do. It's incredibly easy as both a player and as an organizer.
Yeah, and I like it too because you can just run your event. It can be Arena or MTGO. It can be Spell Table, webcam tournaments, however, Discord, however you want to organize it. It's just that I like that. I want to get a little more into that, I think.
I'd highly recommend it. And hey, if you want to come over, and we're hosting historic Pauper events every Wednesday, and then at least one, if not more, weekends per month.
Okay. Yeah, that's excellent. Now, forgive me if I'm wrong. I don't play Arena that often. Standard and Historic are pretty much the only formats on Arena. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's some sub-formats like Brawl, but the main tiers of which card pool, it's only Standard and Historic.
Okay. I was just double checking.
Yeah, if it's all right if I jump in with a question sort of based off of something that you said a second ago, Alaric. Whenever you were talking about the differences in, I guess, ban lists between official WotC ran either F&M Nights events and something that you might run, how does the historic Pauper community sort of come to an agreement on what the ban list is? Is it basically like the organizers, like each individual organizer will have to agree? Or is it more of, if there's enough backlash, whoever organizes it will definitely sort of go ahead and not allow that card for their individual event?
That's a great question, Christian. I think it was initially a little bit by fiat. As the first person who was running a Discord server that was exclusively dedicated to historic Pauper made that decision. I was not part of the server at that time, so it came as a little bit of a surprise, but not an unwelcome one when I joined the server and realized that Ancestral Mask was banned. It made things a lot more simple in terms of how the format was defined. It freed up a number of really troublesome cards that I had to play because otherwise I was going to lose to Hexproof. Since then, I've actually been party to 2 conversations where in other events that I've either taken over as organizer and helped out with, that I've convinced other organizers to accept that same ban list. And every single one that I've ever talked with has agreed very quickly because they can see how much it allows the format to be diverse and allows the players to do really fun, cool things. And also, there's an event with one organizer where I was able to play an unbanned version of Hexproof before we decided to ban it, and it's not a pleasant experience for anyone in the tournament, even with sideboards. Yes.
Now, is this all data-driven, or maybe piggybacking on what Christian said, is it more community outreach towards the organizers?
I think it ends up being that people will rely on certain experts. I've managed to land as something of an expert in this format, even though I haven't played as many games as some, mostly because I was talking about it before anyone else when there was no ban list besides petitioners, and I was able to talk with the organizers and explain this is how it's going. There is a certain amount of data behind it, but no one bothered recording any of the data from the first year and a half of Historic Pauper.
Oh,
so
okay.
there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, but I've never found an organizer who was unreasonable. Everyone's just such a nice person in this community.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. Yeah, community is a huge deal. For me anyway, that's one of my biggest draws towards this format. I know all the formats have their own niches, their own communities, but I particularly like the Pauper one myself.
No, I've loved the Pauper one for a long time. As I was mentioning to you before, I used to play Classic Pauper, and it was a little bit different back then, but I'm hoping that we can bring Historic Pauper up to the same level that Classic Pauper is at now, as I've been incredibly happy to see how much Classic Pauper has grown since the days when it was hard to get queues, it was hard to find enough players, and now it's incredibly well supported. And I was hoping that we were going to have Magic Fest, but obviously COVID kind of messed that up when we were about on the precipice of having great events for it.
Yeah, it did its thing. I could see Historic getting up there. It seems like every few months or so they're adding more cards to the pool. There's always people talking about it on Twitter or asking where I can play. What is there? I think 2 or 3 times just in this last week I was asked if there's a website with all the decks on it, or is there a deck list website for Historic Pauper, and just that sort of thing. So I'm seeing more interest just on my level too. So that's really good.
You've actually keyed in on a really big problem that was occurring, Brad. Mm-hmm. Prior to I don't think this didn't even exist once I started joining the Discord server. There was never an accurate list of deck lists for Historic Pauper. That obviously cards would constantly be printed. You'd only have this format come around once every 3-4 months, and you'd constantly, when you're like typing in like, oh my gosh, I need a deck for this, I really want to play this, there's no deck lists that are actually updated to the current set. So I took it upon myself to create that set of deck lists, and I've been aggregating for what I think is the best deck. There's another website that's associated with my Discord server I cannot take any credit for it. They're doing a great job, and they've done all the coding for it and everything else, and it's a real treat to look at. And they've figured out, from a data-driven perspective, this is what's being played. Mine is much more of an opinion project, but I do have about 20 deck lists there. They have every single deck list that did well for every event above 10 people.
Oh, wow. That's a lot more than I was expecting. That's excellent. Well, good on you. That's good to hear. I'm glad it's getting compiled, and it's becoming a resource for people.
I can't take credit for the website. I have my own document that I keep updated, and I make accessible to the public.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen you post your Google Doc or what have you. It's pretty impressive, actually. It's a lot to keep up with when you don't have an outside resource like a MTG Goldfish or whatever, to pull to scrape that data from. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Yeah, so this next one's, I guess, a little bit more broad, but sort of break down, I guess, your Magic the Gathering journey to us from the beginning all the way to what led you up to Historic Pauper.
Well, that's a big question. I'll try and give a concise answer.
Sure.
So it started that a bunch of friends were telling me, "Oh, you should play this game, and this game's fabulous, and you like chess, so you're gonna like this." And I resisted them for a number of years, and then I started playing first when I was 17 or so. Morningtide had just come out, to give you a sense of the time, and then I started playing kind of kitchen table type events with people at my university, and then I kept getting more and more into it. I first walked into a card store for the pre-release of Alaric Reborn. Okay. And then from then I've just been hooked, and I've been playing Magic ever since. And I was always good with rules in whatever game I was doing. So I became a judge in 2011. And I judged something like 10 to 15 Grand Prix and the World Magic Cup for 2012. And was involved in a lot of stuff at that level. And I played a number of PTQs with no especially good results. I played some fun decks, though. And I eventually ended up just shifting down because I didn't have as much time with going into law. And I started just playing Modern and Limited. And then Arena came out. And I enjoyed playing Standard, but after a certain point, it becomes a grind. And I eventually discovered Historic Pauper when it first came about. I believe the first time was... I don't remember the exact year, but I can remember the event. And it was a holiday special. It was 3 weeks long or something like that. And it started like December 14th and ran all the way through the first week of January. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I was just instantly hooked. And it was this great little queue. And you got a prize if you got 1 win. But if you could get 5 wins before you took 2 losses, you got some special alternate art card. I don't remember what it was at this time. I think it was some random rare that didn't matter, but I wanted it. I wanted 4 of them.
You had to have it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I started playing Blue-Red Wizards, and the format back then was like 50% of 50% of the decks played. What's the rat you can play any number of? That's a colony of rats, and like half of the decks in the format were that. So the format's changed a lot since then. Colony of Rats is solidly a tier 3 deck now.
Is it? It's still played though, right?
I have not seen it played in about a year.
Oh, okay. That's it's a pretty good journey. Kind of spanned all the different formats and different career paths with Magic. Did you ever hit that moment where most Magic players do, where they're like, "I'm going to be a champion. I'm going to, hit all these tournaments and I'm going to win the world"? Or did you just sort of take the judging more seriously, and the playing kind of went secondary to your judging path?
I've always been competitive, so I always enjoyed the competitive aspect, but I never hit the PTQ grind the same way others did. I think also living in California, it's a lot harder to traverse state lines, and it's different if you live in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, and you can easily cross 3 states in a couple hours.
Sure.
And in California, we were locked pretty much, unless you wanted to drive 7-8 hours, we were locked into 3 PTQs per season. And I would usually end up at probably 2 of those per season. And I enjoyed trying for it. I enjoyed trying to live the dream, but I never really chased it as much as some of my other friends did.
Okay. So yeah, you told us you got hooked on historic Pauper. Is that now, has Arena sort of supplanted MTGO in your mind? Do you ever go back and visit your old MTGO account and Classic Pauper and all that sort of thing? Or are you still, have you evolved to the Arena player?
I think I've mostly evolved to the Arena player. I still keep track of my MTGO account, but I was a little sad. I admit that I stopped playing Classic Pauper when they banned my deck out from under me. I was playing back in the days of Cloud Post, Invigorate, and Gush. And that was the Wild West of Classic Pauper,
yes,
but I loved it. It was a lot of fun. But I was a little disappointed that my deck was banned, and I didn't feel like transitioning to the early versions of Tron. So I kind of left it alone, and I preferred having the physical cards. And then I kind of drifted back to online Magic with the advent of Arena, as I enjoy online collections that I could actually say, okay, it's going to be fine if I start playing Arena because I can figure out a way of not putting any money into it and it'll be okay. And I thus far managed to do that.
Oh, excellent. I know that I saw it on your Twitter bio, as well as you just mentioned it a few minutes ago, that you're a big chess player. Now, do you see a lot of similarities between chess and this cardboard game that we love so much?
I definitely do. I think that there's a lot of similarities between choosing your deck and choosing your sideboard and choosing an opening in chess at the higher levels. I'll admit I don't quite play at the levels where it's as needed for that, as I don't play at master level for chess, but there's definitely a lot of thought that goes into choosing an opening before a tournament.
Excellent. A lot of strategy in both, I imagine, too. I was terrible at chess. You can't really play aggro in chess. I mean, I guess you could play aggressive in chess. I just never figured it out.
Oh, you definitely can. I'm sure you'd be fine as a chess player. I know a lot of Magic players who have either come from chess or moved into chess, as there's a number of high-level Magic players who do that. And I actually was on that kind of circuit at Grand Prix. Whenever I was there for judging, I'd find time at the end to gather up this crazy group of chess players who was there. And
oh, wow.
It was quite a group.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. That's a cool little side event, something I've been to a few events, and I don't think I ever saw that. That's pretty interesting.
I was mostly on the West Coast. If you ever come out here, or if I come out there, you'll see me with my chessboard. I'll always be there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to set something up post-Corona, I guess.
I look forward to it.
Christian, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, so earlier you mentioned sort of how you mostly play on Arena, and obviously Historic Pauper is probably exclusively on Arena. So how would a newer player move over to Arena to get into the format? That's something that seems daunting to me personally, and I know a lot of people that it's probably daunting to as well.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an incredibly daunting issue, and that's something that I've been trying to push WotC a little bit on whenever I can. I so far haven't gained any traction. I think the biggest issue is that I'll briefly explain the problem, and then I'll explain how we've been trying to overcome this.
Yeah,
the problem is the MTGO economy. And the fact that there's the wild cards that exist, and how many wild cards you need when you actually can't open them in packs, because common wild cards are the only ones you do not get through packs or through the treasure chest system. And that makes them incredibly valuable for players who are trying to break into Historic Pauper. It would be a lot easier if, similar to MTGO, that you could just buy these really cheap cards or really cheap packs.
Right.
But unfortunately, you can't do that. So it ends up being that the 4 copies of a certain common from an old set are more valuable than 4 mythic rares, sometimes from a current set. And it creates this interesting dynamic. So to overcome that, one thing that some people in our Pauper community have been trying to do is you get a certain number of cards when you start on Arena. And a couple people have been playing around with, okay, what's the best deck you can possibly build with those starting cards, and what decks can you kind of roll over into? And they've been doing a really good job with that.
I don't mean to interrupt, but is that like a welcome pack for, new account sort of thing?
Exactly. That's exactly what happens. And you get, I don't remember exactly, but I think you get 10 decks. Each one is 2 different colors. I think it was based on the Guilds of Ravnica currently, but they switch over every once in a while.
Okay.
So they've been trying to figure out, okay, how can we mix and match these to create something that's the best possible starting deck, and then how can we roll this into a deck that's something that's in a defined metagame that we think, oh, this deck can actually win a tournament.
Sure. Okay.
And it's easier than one would expect, but it did take a little bit of thought before, because we had a lot of new players coming in saying, oh my gosh, I don't have enough common wild cards. How can I take this pile of cards that WotC has given me and turn it into a deck that I can compete in any of the tournaments you're running? And I think we did a good job with that.
Yeah, it sounds like you did. I haven't talked to anyone that's played the format or played any of the events that is dissatisfied with it. I think the biggest issue, like we were just talking about, is the economy on Arena. I come from, much like you do, paper boomer. If I wanted cards, I went and bought cards. Even on MTGO, if I need a card, I just go to whatever website and I buy a card. Whenever I do ask the question of, well, how do I get into Historic Pauper, or how do I get into a specific format on Arena, someone inevitably comes back with, just draft. Just draft until you get the cards you want. Is that a viable path to take?
I personally think it is, but I think it comes down to patience. And I think that's one of the things that the project that was actually associated with the website I mentioned, that's not my website, but it's the website associated with my Discord server that I help moderate. And I'd highly recommend checking out that website. Just take a look at what the new deck lists look like versus the deck lists that I've published as, like, this is what you should be trying to get to. And I think that they're close enough. But I do think that drafting is a viable path, as that's the way I built up my current Arena account. It does take a while, though. That's the only problem.
Yeah, sure. I imagine that's a bit of a grind. But if that's your thing, all the better. Yeah, absolutely.
It definitely helps if you love draft to build your collection for whatever format you're trying to do.
Sure. Yep. Let's see here. What we got next? Now, I would think it's nice to know that every time there's a new set or a new anthology released on Arena, you'll pretty much get at least a handful of cards that Historic Pauper, they'll see play in Historic Pauper, where that's almost the opposite of, quote unquote classic Pauper, where a new standard set comes out and we're excited if we get 2 or 3 that we can play with. Out of 112 commons or whatever, we're excited if we get, 1% of that or 2% of that. Whereas I imagine it's got to be a little different on Arena, A, because the card pool is a little smaller, and B, you want to make as much use of the pool as you can.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think that we end up with Kaldheim was especially good. So we're a little bit biased. There's a bit of a recency bias for Kaldheim versus Zendikar. Zendikar had almost no impact on the format. Zendikar Rising, that is.
Yeah.
However, Kaldheim completely redefined the entire format, and we've had like 5 new decks spring up. It's completely changed what decks are good and which decks are bad, and it's just been an incredible renaissance for Historic Pauper in the last couple of months.
That's excellent. And now, this is just sort of an aside. Excuse me. The legalities are based on what is printed at Common on Arena, and that's it. Correct?
That is correct. So one of the common issues that comes up is someone searching on Scryfall, and they find a card like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, which is obviously a classic card.
Right.
And it's a common in the original Theros. It's an uncommon in the new Theros. And only the new Theros is on MTG Arena. So Historic Pauper is only things that are printed on Arena at Common, which means we also don't get some of the other burn spells, which have historically been printed at Common in the past, but have recently been upgraded to Uncommon.
Okay, that makes sense. It makes it a little easier to keep track of, I would imagine. You want to take the next one, Christian?
Yeah, so for me, what are the most prominent archetypes in Historic Pauper? And then building off of that, are there any sort of like under the radar decks that might attack those decks well?
Ooh, that's a good one. So this is obviously my own opinion. I'd like to think I'm accurate. And I think I have some of the results to back it up, but I know that there's some people who argue with me, and I'm sure they'll listen to this podcast and say, like, oh, what is he talking about? But I think generally Dimir Snowball, which is the value mid-range deck, is commonly regarded as one of the best decks right now because it gets to pack a full range of removal and then also have enough value in its creatures to be able to beat all the control decks back. The reason it's called Snowball is because any one card off the top could completely start a new Snowball. It doesn't matter if a control deck is stable. If you draw Cloud Concealer and it draws a card, then you draw Cadaver Imp and you play it and you recur a card from your graveyard and you just keep going. Mm-hmm. It's very tough for a control deck to actually fight that, as control decks love being in a top deck war where their cards are higher impact. So I'd say that that's definitely one of the pillars of the format. There's another deck which actually only got discovered recently. It theoretically has been in existence for a few months, but it was, or I should say, for maybe 5 months, but it only came about in January when it was discovered. It looks like an utter pile of garbage. It's really incredible what it looks like because it plays 4 colors, technically. It plays Momentary Blink as its blue card, and it plays Omen of the Forge as its red card. And it's one of the only combo decks in the format. It plays Ancestral Statue, which I'm sure you've never heard of. It's a common from Dragons of Tarkir, but it was reprinted in Jumpstart.
Oh, and I would have to look that one up.
Here, wait, sorry. You guys are classic Pauper people. This is really easy. So basically, it's a core Skyfisher deck.
Okay.
We only recently got enough core Skyfishers to actually make this work. So it's a core Skyfisher deck that uses Omen of the Dead as its recursion loop. So every core Skyfisher that comes in, you bring back the Omen, and then you recur every single one of them from the graveyard.
Okay.
So that's one of the strong decks right now. And there's a White Weenie deck that's a pillar of the format now. I can't believe I'm saying this. I considered it a tier 3 deck for a long time, and then it recently got revitalized with some of the new cards from Historic Anthology 4 and from Call Time. Mono Black Control is a classic, and it has gotten extremely good over the years. It's gotten a little bit worse, given that it no longer plays on Hexproof. I think those are probably the main pillars, though.
Now, what does a Gary-less Mono Black control deck look like? I'm so used to, the Pauper I play or what have you, that if you're building black, you just throw Gray Merchant in there. What does a deck like that look like without that card?
Okay. So there's a little bit of a disagreement right now, so I'll just say that right now. Do you know what the card Ill-Gotten Inheritance does?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess that's actually made somewhat of an impact on Classic Pauper, but it made a huge impact on Historic Pauper. Mostly because black decks actually couldn't answer it, so it created this Ill-Gotten Gains war, and then eventually Frika's Libation was printed, so you actually had an answer to it in black. But most of the time, it was a kind of drain you with that, and then use a bunch of removal just to remove all the creatures from the board, and then gradually drain you out. Just have kind of inevitability game.
Okay, so it was super grindy.
Yes, it was incredibly grindy. And it gets to play like Reaper of the Night and other stuff as discard, and it's been very solid. Sure.
So is that one card that I thought would actually show up a lot more in Classic Pauper, and it really never has, was Feed the Swarm? Is that one that is played a lot in Historic Pauper? I love that card for some reason.
A lot of people tried to play it, but the life loss was unfortunately a little too crushing. There's a few decks that play it, but most of those decks aren't very good. So most of the control decks end up playing Frika's Libation as their enchantment removal, and that's where they ended up.
Yep, that makes sense. It's a pet card that goes into decks that aren't good. That's why I love it.
No, everyone thought it was going to be really good, and it just never ended up materializing. Okay. I did want to go back, because I didn't actually answer Christian's question fully.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine. No. what he asked was also what decks that are a little bit off the radar that can attack the top decks. I think that one of the best examples of this is actually Turbo Fog. And it's probably the most annoying deck in Historic Pauper right now, as it creates a loop, draws its entire deck, and then clears the mind to reset the entire deck. And it's very hard to interact against for a typical creature deck.
Yep. We have a similar Turbo Fog in Classic Pauper, and it is miserable to play against.
Luckily, it has some very poor matchups, so I don't consider it a very good deck right now, but if you're going to use it as a targeted weapon, I've definitely considered playing it in some playoff matches for leagues and stuff, because I knew that my opponent was on a deck that was going to be stone dead to it, and it just has those matchups where it's 100% or it's 30%.
Right. Excellent. So you got a little bit of everything. What about how strong are your tribes decks, your zombies, your elves, that sort of thing?
Zombies is actually interesting because Historic Anthology brought Gem Palm Polluter into the format, which is an utterly unreasonable card compared to everything else in Historic Pauper. Right now, Zombies is actually pretty bad. The good thing about it is that it beats some of the top Dimir control decks, and they're just absolutely dead to it. Zombies is incredible at killing control decks. It's really bad at fighting aggro decks because it needs a board presence, and the aggro decks don't let it develop a board presence fast enough. It's a really slow deck overall.
Okay. Would you say that... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Please, continue. We should talk about zombies before switching.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say if those are the two main tribes that show up, basically. I mean, do you guys have, like, Wizard Tribal and, this tribal, that tribal, just because everything's sort of abundant and common as far as tribes go?
We don't quite yet. The closest you could... I'll briefly talk about Elves, and then I'll go over to the other tribes that exist. Elves has actually just gotten Lissalana Huntmaster, which I know you've had for a long time in Classic Pauper.
It's a staple.
It just gained that. So we actually have only seen like 1 week of it with this, and I've only seen one Elves deck so far, and it performed. But no, we just don't have the data yet. And I think it's going to be pretty decent, but I think it's ultimately a lot less flexible than the bigger green decks. But I could be wrong. Beyond that, I think Clerics exists at some level in a Soul Sisters type of thing with Blight Priest.
Yep.
But at the same time, that deck doesn't have a lot of the tools you have in Classic Pauper, so it ends up being a lot more fragile. And the way that the format works and the way it's defined around value in Historic Pauper, like you either have to be fast or you have to have value, or you have to do something that's just so
broken
off the wall that, basically, you have to hit it from an angle that the other decks can't combat, like Turbo Fog. Like Turbo Fog just chooses just to rip up the rulebook and say, all right, we're playing this game.
Yeah, this is what we're doing. Right.
But unfortunately, Soul Sisters is not quite doing a good enough job right now, and I'd consider it probably the weakest of the more competitive decks right now.
Okay.
Like I rank it like 19th out of like 23 or something like that.
Oh, okay. So it's pretty low on the scale.
It's pretty low. I would personally not want to play it at this point.
Yep.
But it exists. Exists as Clerk Travel. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. That the party deck I mentioned earlier that I've been tinkering with, it's all Soul Sisters and Blight Priests and Blood Priests, and it's just not good. Like you said, it's pretty low down on the winning scale there, but I have fun playing it. So.
No, I think it's definitely something that has a lot more legs in Classic Pauper, though, because you have Night's Whisper, you have Unearth. We don't have tools like that in Historic Pauper, and without those, I feel like it just doesn't have the right amount of punch to get through.
Yep, that makes total sense. I know something that we talk about a lot in Classic Pauper. Some people don't like to talk about it because they don't like to live in that world or what have you, but we talk a lot about downshifts, mostly out of fun, or what would it look like with this or that, not really knocking down WotC's door to downshift specific cards, but just sort of for fun conversation. Are there anything like that? Have we mentioned any cards already that you'd like to see downshifted in the next anthology or the next set?
I don't think so. I'm very happy with where the format is right now. I think this is going to sound a little weird given I helped design the deck, but I'm actually not happy with how powerful Dimir Snowball has been. I think that it would be nice if we had something that would knock it off its pedestal a little bit. I think that there's been some push that white aggro might be that answer because it has a really strong flying presence, which Snowball has trouble with. But at the same time, I would like a few more tools for something like that. I think the printing of Bone Splitter in the most recent anthology is still, the effect of that is still being seen, and it could be that is actually going to be the answer, that enough Bone Splitter decks are just going to overrun the Snowball decks.
Okay.
And are going to make the Flyers strong enough that they can just keep bringing stuff around. For instance, the First Striking Falcon from Kaldheim. I don't know how much it's making waves in Classic Pauper.
The Battlefield Raptor?
Yes.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite.
It's making a lot of waves, though, in Historic Pauper, as First Strike really helps it out in all the fights, and Bone Splitter is going to be an absolute terror on it.
Sure. That one, I had that one ranked pretty high in our set review. I thought it would instantly see play, but I'm only just now seeing maybe one list a week from somebody on Twitter that's playing it. So it's definitely not as strong as I thought it was going to be, but it's still one of my favorites. I've got it in a couple different decks already.
Yeah, so sort of building off of the last thing that you said, Alaric. So we sort of know that some of the more powerful cards, I guess, in Historic Pauper can sometimes make splashes in Classic Pauper and sort of the fringe decks. But is sort of the reverse also true? Where the powerful cards and the powerful decks in Classic Pauper, are they still very powerful? Cards that come to mind for me are like 3-Bit Inspector and stuff like that, I think.
I think 3-Bit Inspector is going to be good, but not great in Historic Pauper. I think the reason for that is the ground game is a lot more solid in Historic Pauper because the format is much more creature-based than Classic Pauper, and I think that you've got a much deeper combo well to go to, and you have a much deeper control well, and without that, the format ends up being more defined in Historic Pauper by cards like Sarulf Packmate. Like, that was going to be one of the most impactful cards in the last couple of sets. Yep.
That one's been huge as of late as well here on our side of Pauper. Showing up in a lot of mid-range, grindy decks. It's a lot. I missed that one in our review. It's pretty good. It's a lot more powerful than I expected it to be. How are we doing on time for you, Alaric?
I'm doing fine.
Excellent. What I know you've already mentioned it a few times as far as websites that you're a part of, your Discords, your Google Sheets that you put out. Outside of tooting your own horn, I guess, are there other good Historic Pauper resources out there? Deck makers, brewers, anything like that? Content creators, I guess.
So I'd like to briefly clarify that I don't run the Discord. I'm one of the moderators on two different Discords that do Historic Pauper content. I'm also one of the I'm an organizer for both of them for events. But there's a lot of interesting visionaries who do a lot of crazy brewing on the dedicated Historic Pauper Discord server. And that's where you want to go if you want to talk about all these crazy brews that are almost never going to see the light of day because they're just like too out there sometimes.
Right.
But they are a lot of fun. And they're what create the next set of decks that we're trying to beat in these leagues. Once someone finds that idea, it's like, oh, hold on. This is actually a really good idea, and we never would have thought about this. And we have some really good players there. One player that I always make sure to watch is someone who consistently makes Mythic in Historic and Standard every set. And then he always comes with these crazy brews. And it's the most recent one I was just looking at today is like mono red gremlins. And I was like, there's no one. Like, it just completely flipped me for a loop. And I was like, wait, what? And then like he's like, oh, I can make this gremlin like a 10-3 on turn 2, or not turn 2, on turn 3. And it's just like, wait, what? And
that sounds amazing.
I'm definitely going to be looking at this deck going forward. But some brews don't work. Some brews do work. I definitely recommend that you check out the Discord server and just hang out there, and you'll see a lot of interesting ideas go by, and you'll see a lot of decks. That's what I'd recommend to anyone who's trying to get into the format. And there's a lot of friendly games going on basically 24/7, as we have people in just about every time zone.
That brings up something I think I probably should have put earlier in the interview, but if you're on, let's just say you're on Arena, and you get the jive to play some Historic Pauper, is that an actual selection, or do you direct challenge one of your buddies and say, hey, do you want to play some Historic Pauper? Like, is that an option, I guess, to choose on Arena? Is that a format you can choose from?
Unfortunately, it isn't at this time. The closest you can get is choosing Pauper, or you can choose Historic. Typically, everyone builds their decks in Historic because Pauper doesn't quite define all the legalities correctly. And it's just easier that way. And then from there, you do realistically have to have another type of communication with your buddies to fire an event or fire a game with someone. But you can usually find that through a couple of different Discord servers at this time.
Yeah, that's where Discord comes in. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess what you're saying about having just the Pauper selection, that probably encompasses like standard and everything else. But if you want to play specific historic Pauper, it's probably a couple more hoops to jump through, but not too bad. It doesn't sound like.
It's not too bad. Most people can generally find friendly games whenever they want, and then we run tournaments somewhere between 1 to 2 times a week.
Excellent. What else you got, Christian?
I'm pretty sure that's just about everything for me.
Fine. Alaric, is there anything you wanted to add to, or did we miss from the conversation that you wanted to add to? I mean, feel free.
Just a general invite to all the classic Pauper players out there. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely.
I'm happy. I've created a metagame project to help anyone who wants to come in and say, oh, I have an arena account already, and these are the decks that you should be playing. I'm giving everyone all of my knowledge that I possibly can. I post all of my decks there even before I play them, so there's no surprises. Like, everyone knows that if there's a deck that's good and I know it's good, it's already on that list, and I'm happy to say, like, I think it's the best deck, I think it's the second best deck, or I think it's the 23rd best deck. And you're allowed to play the 23rd best deck, but just know I think it's the 23rd best deck.
Just know it's at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, so everyone's welcome. You should definitely check out the Discord servers, and you should check out probably the Historic Pauper website, as that'll also allow you to see the lists of this is what you start out with, and this is the best way to start out Historic Pauper if you've never had an arena account.
Okay, so it actually gives you what you start arena with. Here's your options, sort of branch out from there.
Sort of. It gives you the list that the website creator, who's also a brewer and a good player, thinks are the best decks, and I agree with him generally.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. It's nice to have that all in one place.
Or sorry, to clarify, the best decks that you can build with the cards you start out with. It does not actually provide you a list of every single card.
Right. Okay. Yep. That makes more sense. Okay, I gotcha. Now, let's go over some of the promotional stuff here. Where can they find you at, Alaric?
Well, you can find me on Twitter as @Platypusjedi. I'm always happy to talk about Historic Pauper. You can find me...
best social media handle ever, Platypusjedi.
I've had it for a while. It's a mixture of two of my favorite things.
Okay.
So, you can find me on Discord. I believe I'm Platypusjedi 2626. I think that's the ending of or I'm Platypusjedi and then whatever Discord number is assigned to my name. And you can find me in the MTGA Historic Pauper Discord server and the Plague League, which is the two Discord servers that I'm associated with and run Historic Pauper events for. Excellent.
What else you got, Mr. Christian? Anything?
Yeah, no. Brad, I'm pretty sure all of our viewers know where to find us. I'm on Twitter @JustGuyDad. Brad, I'm pretty sure you're on everywhere where you can be found as Pauper_B, except for on MTGO, you're Brad DrakV, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, or they can shoot us an email over at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If anyone wanted to get into the Discord servers that were previously mentioned, I'll make sure to have them all down below in the description for the YouTube channel. That way they're easily accessible. Or you can reach out to any of the three of us on Twitter, I presume, to get an invite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most definitely.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructive Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for listening. Take very good care of each other.
Never stop brewing.